Hi everyone, I'm Lon Litzia. I'm the CEO of October Health. We're here for another episode of Pressure Point, and I'm really excited to have Yael Rosen, who's the co-founder and director for two businesses, Fervor and Pulse. We'll hear more about what they're about through this episode, and we're really here to chat about what the ingredients are for a great company culture. So with that, Yael, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Great to have you here.
Thank you. Very excited.
So, as always, want to start with a bit of your background. How did you kind of land here today? Tell us a bit more.
Okay, awesome. So, I'm an industrial psychologist by profession. I studied my undergrad, honours and masters at Wits. Took a few gap years along the way for some work-life balance. And then I went into the corporate world. So I worked for Hollard for a number of years, started in their HR team and eventually transitioned into continuous improvement, which is really a team of process engineers and management consultants who go out into the business and enhance process efficiency across different departments. And I was lucky enough to apply and get accepted to be seconded into that team, where I worked very closely with the engineers as someone who has some people skills and they don't. And just really learned a huge amount in terms of how people and processes kind of come together and enhance a business in every shape and form. But I woke up a few mornings and felt like I didn't want to go to work and felt like it was a sign for a change. And I was young enough to leave the corporate world and potentially start my own venture. And so I decided to do that with a really close friend. And we started Fervor 7 years ago. And we really started the business because we found the world of industrial psychology and HR pretty boring and stale, and most filled with old people and old thinking, and we wanted to do something different. And that's really how we started, with our own vision to help our clients make real positive and impactful change through shaking things up, through doing things differently, and through considering their employees and the lives of people at work. And that's really what we were focused on from a consulting perspective. And as we grew and developed in our kind of journey as a business, we also built two tech products. So the one is called My Feedback Guru. It's an online feedback platform, a 360 platform that allows leaders and teams to share anonymous feedback with each other in terms of how they experience at work and culture, as well as Pulse Motivation, which looks at what drives and motivates people. And it's got quite a deep psychometric element to it. So it understands an individual, kind of like a personality assessment, and it matches that with what is a business doing in order to fulfill those drivers. And in understanding that, it understands how motivated people are, how engaged they are at work, and what the company employee net promoter score is, as well as their retention and how likely people are to stay in the organization. And in understanding that kind of full picture, businesses can enable people to be more effective at work, to perform better, and to be more happy, engaged in the environments that they work in.
Okay, awesome. So, sure, there's a lot there. So I actually want to take it a bit of a step back, right? I think firstly, like super interesting, not usual to have, industrial psychologists that start their career in HR that make the move to like a business process role. And if you look back at your experience and the work that you did when you were at Hollard, like how do you think that's helped you kind of see the bigger picture within organizations or be more effective in your role as, you're a business partner to your clients? Do you think that's put you in good stead when it comes to your career today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think originally in my role in HR, I was always a support function to a number of different business units. But ultimately, I lacked the commercial understanding of what those business units actually do and how they operate. And in the continuous improvement work that I did, where I had to immerse myself into like the financial team at Hollard, which was over 150 people, or the life insurance business, and understand the intricacies of how that works in each step of onboarding people to have a life policy, I gained a different lens of a commercial understanding in business. And how much processes and people have to work together in order for businesses to be successful. And I think that really put me in good stead to go into multiple environments in different businesses with different types of people, but also to start my own business because I had a much more open mind and deep insights into what it takes for a business to run really effectively.
That makes sense. And I think also, as an org psych, a lot of your work is around process and people, right? So it almost feels like the perfect role for someone with an org psych background, interestingly.
Yes, except I probably didn't understand the extent to which processes are as important. I understood so much about people and the people psychology, but didn't fully understand how much processes affect people and when processes change, what it does to them, how to get them on board, the full change management process, how to show them that changing processes can change their lives as well and give them opportunities for growth and development. So that gave me a huge amount of insight as well.
Awesome. So I think that's a great point to start moving forward and touching on culture, because I think a big part about culture is managing change.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's often something, we hear from clients, you see generally in the market, is that companies don't manage change effectively. So in your work with Ferva, in your experience elsewhere, what is it that makes for successful transformations or change management programs? Obviously, there's a process element to it, but to your point again, that's half of the kind of the equation. How do you get that right?
So I think for me, the crux when it comes to change is people and communication. And I think I've seen change fail the most when there's a lack of transparency, when people are not brought into the process, where they're not encouraged to take part, given the support that they need and the empathy in order to go through that change. So when we embark on any transformations in a business, whether it's rolling out a new performance management system or implementing Pulse in an organization, for us, what's so important is that we take time and we work with the leadership team to effectively communicate in a transparent way. Why is the business doing it? What is it about? What do we do with the information and data? And how do we take that data to effect real change? And I think that if you have a leadership team that is not strong enough to manage the change through communication and through ongoing empathy and support, that's kind of where change gets a little bit rocky, and it's a really big challenge for businesses to manage.
Yep. So it's transparency. It's about bringing people along that journey with leadership. I think, what about situations where there's a bit more, secrecy, if I can use that word, around the change, right? So it's maybe a bit more sensitive. How do organizations manage that? Because that obviously, great, we've got a new performance management solution, great story that you're selling to employees, but we've got an org structure, and that might mean that some jobs are impacted. Not such a great story that you're telling to employees. And obviously, there will be a time where that's communicated. And I think your point really important, that that's handled in a way that's transparent as far as it can be, and employees are brought along that process. But how do you handle that type of sensitivity if it is a more sensitive change that's happening within an organization?
It's a great question, difficult question to answer. I think it's probably one of the hardest things, because you're wanting to be as transparent as possible to keep people on the journey, but you also have to protect, to some extent, the business and ensuring that the right information is communicated at the right time. So something just really important to me from a values perspective is our business has always wanted to make positive and impactful change. And sometimes there are those difficult elements, but we always work with businesses who have the right intentions, who do the right thing, and who really think about putting people first. And if we come to businesses that don't operate from that perspective, we often part ways and we don't work with them, because that positive change is what's really important to us. To your point, though, I think it's difficult sometimes in a change process to know how and when to communicate. But I think even if you communicate to a business that we need a few more days to gather our thoughts, to put things together, and we will come back to you with more information, just that type of communication and keeping people in the loop allows them to kind of feel like the business, things are under control, they will get back to us and they know what's going on. They're on these large gaps of no communication where it makes people feel vulnerable, feel insecure potentially about their jobs, etc. So I think just the ongoing checking in and just also seeing how people are doing is a good idea.
It's about honesty, right? I mean, if there are constraints around what can be said, say listen, we limited in what we can say. That's better than saying nothing.
100%.
Okay, awesome. So I think, carrying on, in the theme of culture, it sounds like the first ingredient is communication.
Perhaps.
Right. And that comes to change, but I think that has applicability more broadly across the business. You've had the privilege of working with a lot of different business leaders, a lot of different businesses. What are some of the other ingredients that you've seen at play that make for a successful culture and engaged employee base?
Okay. So I think for me, probably one of the most critical elements is the type of leadership that you have in the business. And leaders who act and behave in a certain way, who show care for their employees, and not just in a generalized sense where we consider, oh, how can we just make all employees happy? And we rinse and repeat, oh, bonuses is the right way. I think when you really think about customizing and tailoring to people's needs and understanding individuals for who they are, it takes your ability to drive people successfully forward to a significant level. So for me, I think empathetic and leaders who take the time to lead is important. Often when I talk to leaders about what does that really entail and the time required to sit and get to know your team, to check in frequently, to ensure that there are continuous feedback loops on how they're doing from a performance point of view, give really honest and critical feedback so that they can grow. Leaders often say, it's so time consuming. And my response to leaders then is, well, then you don't have time to lead. Because in a leadership position, a huge portion of what you're doing is not just executing in your role, but it's guiding the rest of the team that kind of supports you to be effective. And if you don't take the time to do that, I don't think you'd be able to progress the business forward. So for me, that understanding individuals for who they are and giving them support and empathy through the process, I think are some very critical and key ingredients.
So it really comes down to relationships, right? And
absolutely
investing in that in an authentic manner.
Yes. And I think authenticity is important because, yes, I need to invest in my team kind of equally, but that doesn't mean that I shy away and shield my team from really honest conversations. So when someone's not stepping up to the plate, when they're not behaving as they should in our business, when they're not performing as they should, a good leader wouldn't shy away from that honest, authentic conversation. But that authenticity from a leader should enable someone to feel like my leader actually cares about me. They're giving me honest feedback for real intentions to grow, to change, to evolve, to develop. And for me, that's critical to a successful leadership-employee relationship.
I think it's a super important point that empathetic leadership doesn't mean that there is a lack of accountability.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you touch on this point of transparent feedback, and I mean, you've summed it up perfectly, this radical candor, right, where it also comes down to communication, because I think automatically when people receive feedback, they feel attacked, or people's natural mechanism is to get defensive. But if a leader maybe starts off a conversation, listen, I'm giving you this feedback because I care about you, because I want you to succeed, it hopefully changes the way that feedback's received, because you've communicated your intention. It's not like you're giving the feedback because you like nitpicking or you're a difficult person. You actually want that person to succeed, and it's an easy, practical step that leaders can take in giving feedback.
And I think the other critical thing is to be open to being on the receiving end of their critical feedback, which sometimes is also really difficult. But whenever I meet, for example, with my team and we give really honest feedback to each other, I always take time to ask them, give me critical feedback. Like, what has frustrated you in working with me in the last month? How could I have done better? How could I have supported you to be more effective in your role? And to be open to what your team has to say instead of being defensive, so that you're kind of modeling the reception of feedback and then taking that feedback and actually practically implementing it in the following month to show them that you take that feedback on.
And how do you, I guess, build trust to make the team comfortable enough to give you that feedback? I mean, I think that's I think the reality in what you can see it in organizations is that people may feel certain things about senior management, but are not confident in feeling that it's a safe space to kind of give that feedback. So how do you foster a culture where there is that level of safety in sharing feedback both ways?
So in our business, we hire a lot of junior and entry-level people. And those are typically interns who come out of university. They have a master's degree in industrial psychology. And the truth is that caliber of person is a really highly skilled professional with no work experience. And so you have to be able to teach them about the impact that feedback will have on their life and on their journey. And whenever we hire new young people, we have to go on this journey with them to show them that, you're not a bad person if I give you feedback on work that I think could be better, or if I believe you could approach something in a different way. And the only reason why I'm doing it is to grow and develop you. It does take a number of months for employees to feel comfortable, and often that it's not a personal attack. But it takes time, and once you get into the groove where they're able to listen to your feedback and they're comfortable to give you feedback, I think you're able to take your business and your team to the next level. But it takes work, and it takes time, and it takes the ability to also connect with your team beyond just performance conversations, checking in on them, seeing how they're doing, also in an informal way, spending time with them, understanding their personal circumstances, because that then helps you to give and receive feedback in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, so I think you got to be deliberate, right? These things don't happen by accident or through osmosis.
Yeah, calendar planning and organizing in as a leader, I think, is one of the most critical things. And if people know that they will check in with you for a lunch once a month and for a more formal performance review once a month, they know that there's consistency and there's reliability, and it's very intentional.
Yeah.
And I try my very best not to ever shift those out or not pitch up for my team, because I think that that also talks to trust and the reliability, which they depend so much on.
Awesome. So I think, again, so many points. I think like some of these things which are maybe obvious if you're in an organization are not obvious to new joiners, right? Whether they've had work experience or not. So these kind of unsaid rules of engagement need to be said, right? Because otherwise, like, things that may sound obvious if you hear them are actually not obvious if you've never been taught them before. So again, it goes back to the importance of communication. And I love the points around like the practical things like getting the time in the calendar, because it's so easy to say, well, we should do performance reviews, but if it's not in the calendar, then very easy not to ever have that conversation or to have a check-in over lunch around how things are going. And, you know, just building that relationship with direct reports in an informal and formal setting.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to go back to a point that you made earlier around pulse. And I think it touches on a theme of alignment, right? Alignment of, you know, what a company is aspiring towards, what it's giving its employees, and what individuals want and what they're aspiring towards. So let's take a bit of a step back and talk to, you know, how does Pulse enable that? Because I think this alignment piece is a critical piece to engage employees into a positive culture.
Yes. So often when a business approaches us to start working with them, we encourage them to start the process with Pulse. And the reason why we do that is because it allows us to get a gauge on what are people looking for as individuals across the business, and what is the company doing that either aligns or doesn't align with what people need. I think the old traditional thinking in organizations is, how do I engage the company as a whole? And businesses think, okay, we pay great increases, we do good bonuses, we have great team building events. Like, surely that's just ticking everyone's box. But the truth is that today, when you have your kind of different generations in the workplace, different races, different ages, just, you know, it's such a diverse workplace, I think considering a one-size-fits approach just does not work. And so we like to start with understanding meaningful data in the organization to build on. So for us, when businesses tell us about their amazing bonus structure or their annual increases, we question them a lot on it, because we can see that young people entering the workplace today are far more driven by fulfillment and purpose and work-life balance. And they'd much rather go home early on a Friday than receive 5 times their monthly salary as a bonus. And so for us, understanding what your people need and then trying to align to those in smaller teams, in departments, as the business overall, we think gives business a different edge. And that will allow businesses to really motivate their teams and ultimately drive performance, drive engagement, and drive retention.
Yeah, so I think that like makes a ton of sense. I think if I take a step back and I'm skeptical, I say, well, how does that scale, right? Maybe like, you know, how do we treat people differently, you know, based on what they want and what they value, and also maintain a level of fairness? So, you know, practically, how do you take these different, you know, kind of things that are important to different people and give everyone what they want whilst maintaining equity or fairness within the organization? So how do you practically do that? It does feel like it's a little bit, you know, of a, you know, tough balancing act to follow.
So I think that we try to divide it into 2 different things. The first is, as a leader, I have a team that reports into me. And what can I as a leader do to understand the needs of the people in my team and work towards fulfilling those specific things? So for example, in my own team, we did this not so long ago. We used Pulse, we did an analysis, and in someone's Pulse came up recognition. Recognition was really important to them, and it wasn't being fulfilled in our organization. And so the things that we maybe thought were important that we were applying across the board weren't necessarily fulfilling that driver. And in just sitting down with a person and saying, what does recognition mean to you? And they say to you, know, when I do work, live feedback of the work was really good or it had a really great impact on a client is really meaningful to me, empowers me as a leader to just slightly tweak and change certain things for my team. If I know that you're a mom and work-life balance is important to you, when you leave at 4:00 on a Wednesday, I'm okay with that because I know that if you're a high performer, you'll most likely catch up the work, and I can then encourage you to do that. And that's how we see it kind of being tailored at a leadership and an individual level. But the data is then collated and looked at at a company level. And typically what we do is we analyze what are the top company drivers, and we think about how we embark on rolling out some really intentional engagement plans in the organization that tap into the key drivers that sit across the entire organization. So if, for example, work-life balance is something that comes across for the entire organization, how do we then consider fulfilling that for the business while we still most likely want to try drive a high-performance culture, which the average business will tell you that they want to do? And so I think it's about understanding what can you do as a company-wide, that will apply to the majority of your people. And then as a leader, for the 5 or 10 people that report to me from a span of control perspective, how can I think about just tweaking and changing certain things to make work more meaningful and engaging to my team?
Awesome. I think that's practical, and it's something which I think every organization can take on, right? You don't need to, have different bonus structures for every employees, but there's small tweaks in your day-to-day and your relationship with employees that you can adapt to give an individual what they want.
And Pulse does that. So if you're looking at your leadership dashboard and it says your team is driven by these top 3 things, or your own specific team, it'll tell you the tools and tips that you need to actually roll those out. And the same at an organizational level. It'll actually give you those potential implementation plans.
Okay, so it's not only about like what people want, it's how you do it.
Absolutely.
So I think there are 2 pieces that you touched on that I want to just dig into a bit more deeply, because I think they play an important role from a culture perspective. The first is, you mentioned recognition. And I think that's something that we see come up so often. And it's actually such an easy thing to do because it doesn't actually cost you anything, or maybe you can spend small amounts on recognizing employees. But do you want to unpack that in a bit of detail? What can companies do to recognize like their employees on a more like as a way of work, right? Not as a special awards dinner once a year, right? Like on a day-to-day basis.
So I'm so happy you touched on the example because I have to self-reflect of my own blind spots as a leader. And because recognition recognition is not something that's important to me, and it's not something that I understand or that drives me. So in thinking that I fully understand my team and actually rolling out Pulse, I'm able to genuinely understand that understanding each person is actually a lot more complex than what I might have anticipated. And so Pulse gave us that insight. But I think, to your point, recognition is becoming one of the core drivers. I think that work-life balance and purpose are some of the top 3 drivers that we're seeing in young people, kind of between the ages of 23 and 28. And how does a business actually go about doing that? So to your point, your typical business thinks, okay, award ceremony, big thing, we do nominations and someone wins an award. But just as a leader, I think that they're very easy things that you can do on an ongoing basis. So one, I think the live feedback when someone does work, just replying to the work that they've sent you and saying, thank you so much. This is such great work. This is why, like the quality of work was really good. You thought about it so strategically. And give them some like meaningful feedback is great. Something that we do in our own team is if we're in a session or a workshop and one of our team members is running it, we would often post some pictures in our WhatsApp chat. I would, or whoever would, kind of publicly acknowledge that person and say they did such a good job. The leaders were so happy. This was some of their feedback. And so we try to do that in a meaningful way. And then really when we connect with a person one-on-one, I try to think very consciously about what has that person done in the last month really well, and kind of step by step talk through why my perception of them is that they did well in that particular thing. So that kind of deep, meaningful feedback, they're actually able to understand and then continually apply it in new work that they take on and embark to do.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think, again, those are things that any organization can implement, right? Very small tweaks that managers need to make on a day-to-day basis to have a very big impact on employees. If I touch on another point that you raised earlier, you touched on kind of this concept of work-life balance, but at the same time, that the organizations that you work with want a high-performing culture, right? And at times, again, these feel like these are two things on the other end of the spectrum, right? Well, how can you have a high-performing culture if everyone's leaving at 4 o'clock and getting in at 10, right? Like, what does that look like? Again, how do you get the best of both, where you have the high-performing culture, but employees feel like they've got a balanced lifestyle on a daily basis?
So I think for me, when you start the conversation of a high-performance culture, what's really important is that individuals understand what is high performance. And if I'm an individual in a business and I don't understand exactly what's expected of me and what does really exceptional goals look like, I'm unable to really get a gauge of what high performance looks like in my world. And so I think starting with that clarity is really important. I think if you drive your business from clarifying goals, driving people towards those goals, but giving them the freedom and the flexibility and autonomy to achieve them, I think if they are high-performing individuals, worrying about where people are and what they're doing shouldn't be a huge function of their day-to-day life. I think the challenge comes in is when there are KPIs or goals and you don't have people that are diligent, who are high-performing people in their nature, who are very ambitious, who would never compromise on those goals for anything else. And then you kind of hit a blurry line where they start to potentially walk on that blurry line. And as a business, you have to hold them accountable to performance and kind of blur the lines of what is allowed from a flexibility point and what isn't. But I think if you give people the clarity on what's expected of them and you hold them accountable to that, those who are high performance should naturally be given the flexibility and autonomy to roll. And others in the organization will be needing a little bit more hand-holding and guidance in order to get there. But the intention of the business should be to try get them there if they can.
So, I mean, I think ultimately it sounds like, well, balance doesn't necessarily mean not working hard, right? It just means autonomy in managing your own time to deliver on those objective expectations, right? So I think that is important, right? And I think with autonomy, there's a lot more that people can do, right? And how they structure their day or how they spend time, with gym or self-care or family time or friend time during their working day, but still deliver on what's expected of them.
Absolutely.
I think, as we reach the end, you've touched on this point of kind of performance reviews or performance management. And I think that's also an important ingredient when it comes to culture and high performance. And you've spoken about objectivity. But again, if we're practical for listeners, what are things that organizations can do to ensure that expectations are clear, that people are getting feedback as to whether expectations are being met, right? They're getting the feedback to know where they need to improve and how they need to improve. And there's structure in the process which is needed to sustain that high performance when it comes to performance management.
So when we typically embark on these processes, we start with the kind of job description or roles and responsibilities so that there's a clarity in general, kind of what do I expect you to achieve in your role. We then take that information and we transform it into some kind of either OKR or KPI document. So different businesses use different approaches and methodologies, but ultimately what you want is a set of goals or metrics that can be genuinely trackable. Some metrics will naturally be more objective. For example, in sales team, financial numbers are a lot more easy to actually track, and there'll always be a level of subjectivity. And another piece of advice I always give is metrics are one piece of what someone is expected to achieve, but how they show up at work from a behavioral point of view, how they live your company values, how they engage with each other, how they engage with your clients or stakeholders is also a very critical piece. So when I think about performance, I think of hardcore tangible goals that I need to achieve in the business and how are people showing up and behaving. And I think giving people that kind of feedback in both arms is really important, because you might have a high performer who's just a real arsehole at work that you don't really want in your culture, in your business. And you might have someone who is really great from a culture fit perspective, but who actually isn't making progress or achieving anything in your business. And so you have to strike the balance between both of those things. Once we've created that, we work with businesses to develop their performance calendar. And depending on when their financial year is, we encourage leaders to have monthly check-ins. They might not need to be the extent to which you're checking on each and every metric, but on a high level, how are you doing? Where are you doing really well? Where are the areas that you need to focus on and potentially do better? And how are you showing up in the team from a value and a culture perspective? And then in a more structured element, either quarterly, biannually, and annually, you have more formal performance conversations. And we typically give leaders and employees an agenda and some prep work to do prior to those sessions, where they come prepared, they can have really meaningful and rich conversations and actually assess according to their KPIs or OKR metrics and goals, how are they tracking and where are they falling short. And that feedback loop on an ongoing basis allows people to get the clarity and also allows businesses to build the structures so that they can roll something out a lot more effectively.
Awesome. I think that's super clear. And again, something that organizations can take and implement straight away. You touched on purpose being a big driver. Let's unpack that a bit more, because I think that's something which is often overlooked or not necessarily obvious to every organization or every leader within an organization.
So maybe using a personal example will help articulate it better. But because I'm someone that is driven by positive change and affecting the lives of people in a positive way, and sometimes people say to me, how can you do that if you're involved in sometimes hiring and firing people? And I have to say to them that, if I'm hiring someone, it's about getting a person into a role that they're hugely aligned and excited and feel purpose-driven for. And if someone is exiting the business, I have to see that as the right decision for the business, but they most likely also weren't their happiest, best self, and a new opportunity is most likely the best thing for them as well. So for me, if I think of purpose and what's important to me, when I have come across incidences or people or clients or stakeholders or suppliers in my life that mismatch my values in wanting to genuinely make a positive impact, I've had to make a decision to part ways. And so I always say to businesses, do your employees understand what your purpose is? And if their values and their purpose in some way is aligned to yours, the likelihood of them wanting to be part of your business will be significant. But if there's not and there's a clash, they're eventually going to get to the point where they have that realization and they don't want to be part of your organization. And so I think thinking about your business's purpose and people's purpose and values and that alignment is so critical. And I think, again, it links to the culture piece as well. Yeah. If we have a set of values and we have a purpose in our organization, we look to people who match that, we should have a really kind of high-functioning team who's driven towards one North Star.
Awesome. And I think it, again, goes back to your point around it's the what and the how, right? And the how and the softer values of a company are hopefully aligned to that purpose as well, right? I mean, I assume the values at Fervor and at Pulse are in line with making an impact, right? They're not just about doing things effectively as HR professionals. It's about driving impact within organizations and influencing individuals in a positive manner. So there needs to be alignment across the board to ensure that, these things are congruent versus, saying one thing and then doing another as an organization.
No, definitely.
Awesome. So we're wrapping up. Any closing words before we summarize what we've chatted about?
Sure. No, I think I'm just so appreciative of the opportunity to be with you today and in your presence. And it's just been great to reflect on things that I often just don't take the time to think about. It's been really, really meaningful.
Good lesson from what you told everyone else to do. Reflect, give feedback, and you need to do it with yourself as well, right? Especially as a leader. If you 100%. Don't do that, then you do lose sight of progress and what have we been doing over the last 6 months or year?
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We've unpacked a lot from a culture perspective. What are some of those ingredients? We've got communication, we've got authenticity, we've got continuous feedback, we've got authentic feedback, and really showing that feedback is coming from a place of care where you want the individual to improve. We've spoken a lot about the how and the what. So not only what are individuals, how are they doing it, and is it in line with the broader culture? We've spoken about purpose and ensuring that there's alignment between, ultimately what is the organization's purpose, not in that they sell widgets, what is ultimately their purpose, and is that aligning to what individuals are doing and helping them find meaning in their day-to-day. And finally, I think one of the most powerful points was this concept of, personalizing the experience for employees and using tools like Pulse to understand what is it that drives an individual and giving them the ability to get the most out of the organization in line with what they want. So with that, a big thank you to Yael and thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much.